So, ladies and gentlemen, today on Sports File, we're going to take a somewhat interesting look at probably one of the biggest mysteries in Montreal Canadiens history. Why did Guy Lafleur, or why did the Habs quit on him, or he quit on the Montreal Canadiens? Now, we have to go back in time to the last big dynasty of the Montreal Canadiens. From the season Lafleur came into 1979, there were 6 Stanley Cups, pretty well, not say the cause of, but were led by Lafleur. He played on the top line from Montreal with Mahovlich and Lemaire, and then Schutt and Lemaire. It was a time where Lafleur was considered, if not the best player in the league, pretty well close to it, until Wayne Gretzky came in. But by 1984, and the 84 season wasn't too bad for him. He had 30 goals and 40 assists for 17 points. But for some reason, when his line mate Jacques Lemaire took over the Montreal Canadiens in 1984, we're noticing rumblings that either Lafleur wasn't responding to Lemaire's defensive style, or maybe Lemaire was intentionally benching Lafleur to get him out of Montreal for whatever reason. Now, GM Serge Savard had kind of Lafleur in the doghouse because there was different rumors going around. Lafleur's nightlife, or alleged nightlife, was either catching up with him or had expanded upon in recent months. Now, what we saw as a Montreal Canadiens fan, that was my first year of college in Woodstock, and I saw several of the 19 games he played in the 84-85 early campaign. He only had a couple of goals and a few assists. Lafleur wasn't the same player, but he was slightly off. He was missing a lot of open nets, hitting the post. He could have easily had 5, 6, 7 goals in those 19 games, which would tie into his normal production. Any superstar getting older, 70 points in a season is still nothing to frown upon. But something wasn't right. Now, in the off season, there was all kind of rumors that Lafleur either was going to be asked to retire or would be traded, and those rumors continued. We only found out years later that Lafleur, I guess, allegedly asked for a trade, and he almost traded him to, of all teams, the Scotty Bowman-led Buffalo Sabres, which were, Scotty was Guy's former coach. He had a great connection. Bowman never benched Lafleur like Lemaire did. They were going to trade him straight up for Gilbert Perreault. Now, if anybody knows how good Gilbert Perreault was, the only comparable Frenchman other than Denis Savard was Gilbert Perreault, because Perreault was not only a leader, he was great on his main line with Robert and Rich Martin, and he also played defensively, and he could play both sides of the ice, and he was getting similar amount of ice time and points with Buffalo. Now, it happened pretty quickly. There was a game against Detroit where Lafleur and Lemaire had a kind of a Mario Tremblay, Patrick Roy lack of eye contact. Lemaire, he had asked Lemaire for more ice time. Lemaire pretty well benched him in the third period. And it came to a point, they had some young players on the team like Ron Flockhart and Alfie Turcotte, and they were getting power play time, and Lemaire wouldn't put Lafleur in the power play. Now, some of the media, including La Presse, the Gazette, some of Red Fisher, were noticing that there was mind games going on. Now, we weren't really sure if it was because Lafleur and Lemaire, basically their friendship was destroyed, or Serge Savard thought Lafleur was done. We all know what happened later on. When Lafleur retired, they gave a big going away ceremony. Lafleur claimed he was going to be in management, but after a couple of years, he did return to the NHL first with the Rangers and the Quebec Nordiques, and he finished off his career after being inducted in the Hall of Fame. But you got to understand, in Montreal, when you have a head coach, when Bob Berry was coaching Montreal and Lemaire took over, he decided to go with a more defensive style, and it paid off in the 84 season. He came within 2 games at the Stanley Cup final. But for some reason, Lemaire, the clutch and grab style that Robinson and Lemaire had used in New Jersey later on, he was kind of the originator of that, where you only score 3 goals, but you only give up 2.5 a game, or less than 3 on average. Did Lemaire force him out? Did Savard force him out? Did Lafleur force himself out? It's like this: when you have a divorce, sometimes it's both people, sometimes it's one person. Some people fall out of love, some people become abusive, some people have mental health issues or different things going on. We really don't know what caused a divorce unless you're in it. I don't have enough legal team to cover my speculation as to what going on. I tell you why. I met Jacques Lemaire covering the Hamilton Russia Canada series many years ago. I found Lemaire was tremendous with the media, was tremendous with me, answered every question, come along as a good person. Lemaire had a lot of stories to tell about his time in Montreal, coaching, about his era. I met Lafleur years later at an alumni game in Woodstock in 2010. He was there with his son and some other great alumni like Richer and Lambert and Richard Sevigny and all these great people. I wasn't going to Guy Lafleur and ask him his first question, tell me why you divorced from the Montreal Canadiens. That's not my job as a journalist. I'm not going to make myself part of the story. But in my podcast, I can basically tell there's many, many people in my friends and colleagues and people I've covered at Dalhousie Minor Hockey, Campbellton, Beldoon, Woodstock, Nackwick, Hartland. It comes up every once in a while and say, Jeffrey, you're a big Montreal fan. What do you think happened? And I have to say to them, and I'm saying now, there's a lot of factors were playing out. It was the 1980s. The NHL was a different type of game. Management had too much control of Montreal. There were still the beer wars going on. The Nordiques were in the league. They weren't going to trade Lafleur to the Nordiques. The only team, technically, they could trade him to was the Sabres because there was an equivalent Francophone player that going to give a good value. But you got to understand, the Montreal Canadiens of the 70s had huge egos. Peter Mahovlich, Frank Mahovlich, Lemaire, Lafleur, Savard, Robinson, Dryden, all these people. Big egos because you could back it up. But the thing is that winning attitude, if Jacques Lemaire was a head coach, Lemaire being the strong ego he was and Lafleur was still playing, he was going to basically be the head coach and he wasn't going to kowtow to any player, including his former linemen. And you got to understand that Lafleur technically was about 3 years past his prime. But for Lafleur, past his prime was 30 goals, 40 assists, and 70 points. That's an awful thing past your prime. It's almost like comparable to Joe Montana when he was forced out of town with Steve Young with the 49ers. That's the only comparable. But the fact is, Lafleur had some injuries, sure, in the last 2 years, but he was very effective. But the problem is he didn't have the line mates. He was given Keith Acton. He was given, if I'm not mistaken, he was given Gainey every once in a while, and putting an offensive and defensive player in the same line. If you had a young player, let's say if all best case scenario, remember if you would have drafted Denny Savard instead of drafting Wickenheiser, Lafleur would be still playing. There might be 2 or 3 cups. But like I said, I think Lafleur, his 80s were like a delay in the 70s. The disco era was done, and that was it for the Montreal Canadiens. Because the Montreal Canadiens were a disco team. They were partying a lot. They had a lot of fan adulation. Any place they go was free beer, for some free drugs, free women, young women, all kind of stuff. Now, it's hard to think in 2019, the Montreal Canadiens, that the team was... This may sound totally bizarre, but as popular as the New England Patriots were, as popular as all these teams are now, Boston Red Sox, Montreal was beyond popular. There were 24 million people across Canada. Maybe 12 million Canadians were Montreal fans. French, English, Maritimers, Alberta, they were Canada's team. The Maple Leafs were nothing. The only team that can compare was the Blue Jays, but the Blue Jays were a couple of years away from their playoff runs in 85 and the early 90s. So you got to understand, this is Canada's team. Lafleur was the quarterback of Canada's team. Jacques Lemaire was the backup quarterback. And here the backup quarterback was technically not benching the quarterback, but was doing everything he could to basically put his stamp on the team. Now, what was really funny when Lafleur left, within 2 years they had the youth movement in Montreal, Corson, Patrick Roy, Richer, and he won the cup in 86. But the system that he won with was not Jacques Lemaire's system. Lemaire was gone, Jean Perron did it. And I think Jean Perron, who was a university coach, University of Moncton, would have played Lafleur. So there's 5 things going on here, again, with the Lafleur retirement. You had Serge Savard trying to put his thumb on the team. They were trying to... Savard really was paranoid. He didn't believe anything Lafleur was saying. There was rumors about Lafleur. Savard kind of turned against him. Lemaire turned against him. Because his production was down, there were some Montreal fans, especially in the French media, were basically saying, he might be done. And Lafleur was a very proud guy. The Guy Lafleur of 1984 is not the same Guy Lafleur I met 2010. The one 2010, he was lean, he was mean, he was focused, all kind of stuff. The 1984 Guy Lafleur, again, it was a different era. He was still caught up in that adulation, and I basically believe all factors play together. And playing for a big team draws a lot of paranoia because the Montreal media has been difficult on its players over the years, just like the Toronto media was for a while. Like the Montreal and Toronto hockey media is not like it was back in the 80s. I mean, you have 5 or 6 major radio networks, you had 5 or 6 major TV stations, you had 5 or 6 major English papers, and you had the tabloids, and you had what was considered the start of the what he called the social media era. There was no internet, but people were basically, preparing for a better way to understand their teams. The fan system had changed. They were demanding more from the players. And when you are used to winning cups as regularly as Montreal did, they end up stop winning cups. It was very scary for the Montreal fans. I think 80% of the Montreal fans that were there in '84 are not there now. Because you got to understand, there's only the Boston Celtics could really compare the amount of titles in a short period of time. From 1956 to 1979, I mean, the Montreal Canadiens won that many cups. Even now, in 2019, there's people out there that still think Montreal's winning the Stanley Cup every 2 years because that's what it felt like. You couldn't beat them. Boston couldn't beat them. The Islanders couldn't beat them. Buffalo couldn't beat them. Chicago couldn't beat them. Toronto, the Flyers, all the contenders. It was like they were the Muhammad Ali or the Roberto Duran of the hockey world, like boxers of the hockey world. And the only team that really bet them was themselves. But I think what happened, one last factor too, when he lost to Buffalo in '83, that 3-game series, he did nothing. '84, they had a little bit of success. In Jacques Lemaire's mind, Guy Lafleur was dead weight. Like, what have you done for me lately? I think maybe Janet Jackson got inspiration from Jacques Lemaire the way he treated Lafleur. But I mean, it's not for me to say how one person should treat anybody else. I was summarily dismissed from Brunswick News 3 different times for 3 different reasons, and it was all money related. Did I take it personal? Of course I did, but had nothing to do with the quality of my work, as he couldn't afford me anymore. And that's the way it goes sometimes. Sometimes when you drop you off the cliff, it's just because you're getting too old or you don't fit in the system. But I know one thing. Guy Lafleur, Jacques Lemaire, Serge Savard, they won so many cups in Montreal, they did it, and I think the pressure was on there to do it a little bit more quicker than they could do it, and getting rid of Lafleur was part of it. But of course, we all know what happened. Lafleur came back with the Rangers, had a big night. He played with the Nordiques. He kind of drew more interest for the Nordiques, and they had a revival as well. Now, what a lot of people don't remember, the expansion draft in the early 90s, Minnesota took them in a draft. But he traded him back to Quebec because he couldn't come to a contract. Lafleur could have played 2 more years, but of course, I mean, he maybe felt he was done. He was a 15-goal scorer when he retired. You can imagine how many goals he would have scored if he was traded. But I mean, whatever you do there, if you ever see Jacques Lemaire or Guy Lafleur or Serge Savard, do not bring up the fact about that, because that's a very touchy subject. You can talk about Savard playing against the Russians, talk about Lemaire, being shunned for the '79 Conn Smythe, Lafleur talking about his injury from, I think it was Pat Boutet against Hartford, which technically caused the loss to the Stars in the quarterfinal, the 1980. But please do not bring up that. That's a touchy subject. You don't go up to your local priest who's not a molester and ask them, what do you think about all the priests there, the Catholic Church, or molesters? Some things they don't talk about. And I don't have the legal currency to speculate what really went on. All I can is repeat, Gazette had one view, La Presse had another view, French media, TQS, TVA, CBC had another view, the announcers had a different view. But the 1984 drama, the Montreal Canadiens, you'll never see that again. That was the last big drama. You would see the téléroman that everybody was listening to. So, not too often that an English reporter like me has to explain to Anglophones and Francophones and Acadians what I think went on. And I think went on, it was just meant to be. It's like Coronation Street. There's bound to be a plot explosion every once in a while. And this was building up from Lemaire leaving in '79, Dryden leaving in '79, the injury for Lafleur, the partying, Serge Savard, the injury, going into Winnipeg, going to retirement. It was like a perfect storm. And when there's a perfect storm, it's a perfect storm. So on this, Tuesday, we're waiting for a little storm to come in. It's my second podcast today, but I got a request from Kendall Giverson, who is a big sports fan and a big listener to my podcast channel. But again, Nathan DeLong, Bo Sheaves, Kendall Giverson, my good buddy Derek Hamilton, all these sports fans, the Richards, the Lapointes, the Coreys, the Hickeys, Mullallys, Calvert Lapointe, Elliot Corey, my cousin. These are all generational fans of the Montreal Canadiens and the Maple Leafs. And the Maple Leafs had drama, but the Montreal Canadiens, that drama was beyond and beyond what we ever expected. So, again, keep your stick on the ice, but if you see Savard, Lemaire, Lafleur talking together at a public event, please take a picture of it, because you wouldn't see that 35 years ago. I'm serious. They would probably get the gloves on and, loser leaves Outremont or something. So, have a great day. Bye.